You know that you're expected to use semicolons in your descriptive narrative piece. However, do you use them accurately and effectively? And that's actually harder than it sounds. This video will help you nail the semicolon once and for all. Schofield on Shakespeare.
Abbiamo il cuore a strisce, portaci dove vuoi.
Bit of background first in relation to GCSE mark schemes. Put very simply, to achieve the top grade, as well as writing brilliantly and doing all kinds of other things, you need to use the semicolon accurately.
AQA Paper 1, Question 5, Assessment Objective 6. Wide range of punctuation is used with a high level of accuracy. Edexcel Paper 2, Questions 8 and 9, Assessment Objective 6, punctuates writing with accuracy to aid emphasis and precision. CIE IGCSE English Language Paper 2, both sections, spelling, punctuation and grammar, almost always accurate. Let's start with some definitions. There are two main ways in which you can use a semicolon, although I would think very carefully before using the second way. Here's the first definition. For example, she began to cling to the safety of the coach, semicolon. At least it had some remnant of familiarity. Why is a semicolon being used here within this sentence taken from Daphne du Maurier's 1936 novel Jamaica Inn? Well, it is because the two main clauses are related. The second one gives some insight into the first. She's clinging onto the safety of the coach, partly because it seems familiar to her. Do we have to use a semicolon here? Well, no. Instead, I guess we could do this. However, this results in slightly more disjointed staccato writing. Another option would be this. I've replaced the semicolon with a comma and added the relative pronoun which. Is there much difference between the feel of these two sentences? Using a comma rather than a semicolon by definition involves a shorter pause between the first and the second clause. Additionally, using the relative pronoun which invokes a subordinate clause rather than the main clause previously used. Thus, this becomes a complex sentence in which the subordinate clause depends on or is secondary to the main clause. Put otherwise, the main focus of the sentence becomes the woman clinging to the safety of the coach. The fact that this coach is marginally comforting due to its familiarity has become an additional detail. Whereas, if we look at the original, the two clauses either side of the semicolon are equally weighted. The fact that the coach is familiar is equally as important as the fact the woman is clinging to its safety. So is there a difference in feel between the two versions? A little, but not a significant one. For me, which version to use will depend on how you have structured your sentences in the rest of the paragraph, the rest of your piece. If you have already used a number of semicolons, you may prefer the first version. Similarly, if you have already included plenty of complex sentences with subordinate clauses beginning with that, or which, or who, you may decide to plump for the more poised second version. Remember, examiners are always looking for variety within your sentence structures. Let's go on to the second use of semicolons. And as previously suggested, I would think very carefully before attempting to use them in this way. And here's the example, taken this time from Edith Wharton's 1920 novel, The Age of Innocence. He could also enumerate the leading characteristics of each family, as, for instance, the fabulous stinginess of the younger lines of Leffertses, the Long Island ones, semicolon, or the fatal tendency of the Rushworths to make foolish matches, semicolon, or the insanity recurring in every second generation of the Albany Chiverses, with whom their New York cousins had always refused to intermarry. You can see clearly why this list needs to be broken up with semicolons. There are simply too many details for it to make clear sense being broken up by commas. You can probably also understand why I'm reluctant to encourage pupils to use this particular method. The sentence on screen contains a whopping 60 words, and I must own up to cutting it down from the original, which had 80 words. Examiners don't like very long sentences, as typically they are only long because the pupil has got carried away and forgotten to put in a full stop.
Time now to do some practice. An extract is going to appear on screen in which a comma has been used instead of a semicolon. Your task? Simple. Read it through and identify where the semicolon should have been positioned.
Press pause to read. This video will resume in 5 seconds time. Reading the sentence out loud and allowing a decent pause for the possible semicolon break can be helpful for these exercises. The semicolon here needs to come after anxious to split up the two initial main clauses. Could it work anywhere else? I wonder whether any of you tried positioning the semicolon after woman. This certainly results in a splendid pause before the final dramatic failure of reassurance. However, it results in the famous comma splice error in the first part of the sentence. Never use a comma to separate two consecutive main clauses. Time for another extract for you to get your teeth into. Where should the missing semicolon be positioned? Press pause now. Pretty straightforward, hey? We need the semicolon after space in order to prevent comma splicing. Notice also that the semicolon figuratively gives space and time on the page due to the gap and the longer pause. And the effect of the semicolon? It creates a link between the two main clauses. It helps develop and flesh out Mary's feelings about losing track of where she is and how long her journey is taking. Let's do one more before you have a go at writing some of your own sentences which use a semicolon. Read this through and, by God damn it, find where the semicolon should have been used. It's pause time. Here's where the semicolon should be positioned. It adds greater weight to the mother's claims of her daughter's intellectuality. It directly explains why she must write to her, as opposed to merely revealing this as a snippet of additional information, albeit a juicy one.
Now let's take things to the next level. Make things really interesting. In this section, I'm going to give you a number of paragraphs from Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca, and then give you a prompt for a missing sentence which, in the original, contained a semicolon. Your task will then be to write this sentence using a semicolon accurately before comparing it to mine and the original.
In the paragraph on screen, the narrator is describing her dream in which she returned to her old home. Now, have a go at extending this paragraph to include a sentence with a semicolon. In the first pre-semicolon part of the sentence, include a statement about the trees. In the second post-semicolon part, write about the tree's roots. Grab a pen to write this sentence now. It's pause time. I write, attempting to use a similar style to the rest of the paragraph, trees strangled each other in the gloom, semicolon, roots twisted and turned in every direction. My aim has been to continue the negative imagery from the first part of the paragraph, the image of nature being a malign force, out of human control. The semicolon emphasises the link between the trees and the roots. After all, the latter is a part of the former, and provides an expectant pause between the two main clauses. Du Maurier's version is, unsurprisingly, better. She writes, "The trees had thrown out low branches, making an impediment to progress, semicolon. The gnarled roots looked like skeleton claws." Whilst I was right to continue the idea of nature being a malign force, the low branches of Du Maurier's trees impeding progress is subtler, whilst the simile, the gnarled roots looked like skeleton claws, is both sinister and original. However, the semicolon works in the same way, providing a flowing link between the trees and the roots. Get the idea? Time for you to have another go. Let me explain the context here. The author is talking about the difficulties she and her husband have experienced following a life in exile. They had to leave England due to her husband being suspected of committing a terrible crime. Have a go at adding a sentence with a semicolon. Pre-semicolon, describe the husband's general view of life. Post-semicolon, describe the narrator's feelings. Grab that pen, it's pause time. I write, "My husband copes or tries to cope in his own way, semicolon. I put on a facade of bright cheerfulness." Doesn't the use of a semicolon work brilliantly here? On the one hand, it highlights the link between the couple. They are married, they live together. However, it also helps draw attention to the difficulties of the pair's current life. The narrator feels the need to pretend to keep beloved hubby's spirits up. What did Du Maurier write? His premonition of disaster was correct from the beginning, semicolon. And like a ranting actress in an indifferent play, I might say that we have paid for freedom. Once again, we have a startling simile used within the sentence which contains the semicolon. Before it was the tree's roots looking like skeleton claws. Now the narrator describes herself as being like a ranting actress in an indifferent play. The semicolon gives a longer pause, and the second half develops or gives one of the consequences of the disaster predicted in the first half, a loss of freedom. Getting the idea? One more for you to try. In this extract, the narrator is continuing to describe her and her husband's very limited, restricted life abroad in exile. Have a go now at writing a sentence which uses a semicolon. In the first part, say something about the radio, and in the second part, say something about the results of a sports match. Time to shine. It's pause time. Here's my doomed attempt to ape Du Maurier. The BBC World Service provides us with many hours of nostalgic reminders of a lost world, semicolon. Test match updates have the potential to return us to the false idyll of the past. Why the semicolon? Well, the second half builds on a detail from the first half. The World Service provides cricket test match updates. Note also how I'm trying to avoid oversimplification. It would be all too easy for an exiled couple to say everything about the past was wonderful, whereas everything in the present is dreary. Not quite. I refer to the false idyll of the past, implying that our memories of the past can sometimes be inaccurately and destructively rosy. Du Maurier wrote, "We have tried wireless, but the noise is such an irritant and we prefer to store up our excitement, semicolon. The result of a cricket match played many days ago means much to us." Here, the semicolon helps exemplify the tragic comparative excitement caused by finding out the results of a mere cricket match.
So, you've written 3 of your own sentences containing semicolons. And you've also spotted 3 occasions in which a semicolon rather than a comma should have been used. That means that you're ready for my concluding quiz. Good luck.
Question 1. Which semicolon has been used inaccurately in this extract? Press pause now to read and identify. Good Lord, what is this semicolon doing here? Remember, each side of the semicolon needs to have a main clause and make sense on its own. Instead of a woeful semicolon, there should be, of course, a comma. Meanwhile, the second semicolon is indeed used correctly. Both sides have a main clause, and the second half gives another detail to the problems of the narrator playing bridge. Question 2. Where should a semicolon have been used in the passage below? Read the extract, think, identify. It's pause time. It has to be here, doesn't it? Post-semicolon explains the reasons why Mary will get on famously with her Aunt Patience. It was because she used to be such fun. Final question. 4 different definitions of semicolon use. Which one is wrong? Press pause now to read and write down your answer. No again. You must have a main clause on either side of the semicolon. Yes, it's fine to have a subordinate clause as well, but there must always be the main clause.
This has been a Schofield on Shakespeare production imploring you to nail the semicolon. Many thanks for watching.